Hey everyone, so this is the guide for the base building plugin that I have published on fab.com, and the guide will be divided into chapters. Basically, you can use this plugin for any kind of survival game that you're working on, or any other game in fact that you're working on which might require base building. You can use this plugin for that. The first thing that I want to go across is that, like, what all are the core mechanics or features the plugin offers. Okay, so the zeroth thing the plugin offers you is that it's very fast and performant because it's written 95% in C++, and the rest 5%, as you know, is primarily blueprints so that you guys can configure it easily, and also the UI stuff. But even with the UI stuff, 100% of the logic is written in C++, and it's only the graphical part which is in blueprints. Also, I've used a fast array serializer which Unreal Engine provides us, which helps us in efficient serialization and replication of persistence related data. Also, in general, I have optimized the data structures for replication and RPC calls. That also lets the plugin be really fast, and also it reduces the bandwidth consumed on the network. The first thing the plugin offers you is that it gives you the support for adding persistence along with the base building structures that you might need for base building. Some part of that is that you will be able to persist the inventories as far as the base building raw materials are concerned for the player, as well as the buildables itself. Then the third point is the raw materials that you need to finish the buildables. Once you place the blueprints of the buildables, those raw materials that are required, they'll also be persisted as part of the plugin. Fifth feature that is offered to you by the plugin is you can move the unfinished and finished buildables. The next point is you can destroy the finished buildables in the form of destructibles, and then you can remove the unfinished buildables itself. The next point is lifetimes of both the buildables and the raw materials. If it is required, you can prolong those as well. I have provided APIs for that as well. For example, if there's like a flag mechanism in the game, in survival game, you place a flagpole down the game near your base, and what happens is all the buildables that are there and everything within a certain radius of the flagpole, their lifetimes get increased so that they don't get despawned. Also, the lifetimes of the raw materials can be increased by a similar API. Then the next the feature that the plugin offers you is that all the raw materials required for the buildables, they can be customized in terms of how many raw materials are required for the buildables, so that is configurable. The next point is the raw materials carried by the player character, the maximum limits of each of those types of raw materials which might be required for base building, they are also configurable. There is also a functionality to split the raw materials within the player inventory, or which are stacked inside the buildables as well. And doors and windows, their opening times can be customized as well. Also, the plugin creates the save files for the raw materials and buildables with the underscore build save suffix per map, and it creates the player inventory save file with the underscore player inventory save suffix per map as well. So if you ever want to wipe away all the buildables and raw materials, you can delete the underscore build save file for that particular map. And if you ever want to wipe the player inventory for a particular map, you can delete the underscore player inventory save file for that. The next section is I'll go over the configurations that you need to do to get the plugin working. The first one is once you download or get the plugin from fab.com, you just need to unzip the plugin, get the folder, make a folder in at the root of your project directory which is called plugins. If it is already there, then that's fine. Otherwise, create a new one and name it plugin. Then place that extracted folder that you had got from fab into that plugins folder. Once you have done that, then you can open your game project. You go to edit and then you go to plugins. So basically you look into the installed section and you click on that. You'll see the plugin available there. You just enable it by clicking on the checkbox over here, and that should enable the plugin. The next thing what you need to do for configuring the persistence is that you need to, how the plugin functions is that you can either get the player ID from the Steam, or you can have your own custom function into the player character which can provide you with the player ID. If you want to configure your game by getting the player ID using Steam, what you need to do is you need to go into the config folder of your project and then click on defaultengine.ini, and then you need to add this section over there. So yeah, I'll have this snippet added into the video's description. The next thing you need to do for getting the plugin working is that you need to add all these collision channels or trace channels for the plugin to work correctly. I'll have this written in the guide description. What you need to do is you can place all these channels anywhere at all, like in any order, but the foundation trace needs to be the first channel in your collision configuration. All these channels can be in any of the order except for the first one. So once you have done that, just open up your character blueprint, and then you need to go to the root of the blueprint over here and then click on add, and then you type in build and you'll see this build component. You can add that. So once you have added that, you get all the APIs base building plugin provides you. Next, I'll go through all the configs that you need to do for the plugin to work correctly. First, what you need to do is you need to go to the build component. So the first parameter in the build component that you can modify is whether to use team or not for fetching the player ID. So what you can do is you just click on the build component and then you can check this box, which will enable your project to fetch the player's team ID. That will be used as the ID for maintaining the persistence of your player inventory. If you don't want to enable the persistence via the player's team ID, you can provide your own function in the player character. How you do that is you click on the blueprint and you go to class settings, and then in the interfaces section over here you see implemented interfaces. You just click on this and then you type in build character, and you'll be shown this interface which I've already implemented, so it's showing over here already. You'll get some interface functions, or you can create your own implementation of a function which is called get player ID. Over here on the left side you can see in the interfaces section, double click on this get player ID and then it will create like a implementation. So you can write your code in the blueprints over here. But if you're implementing your third person character in the C++ code, then you would have added the build component in the code section. In that case, what you can do is you can go ahead and implement the virtual function which is called get player ID pure, and provide your own implementation for fetching the player ID by whatever mechanism you have implemented for your multiplayer game or even the single player game. So the next thing I want to talk about is there's a game instance subsystem. There's this file is called which is a game instance subsystem. So basically you open it just in case you want your plugin to function for a single player game. You can just check it over here in this file. This will result in making the plugin work for a single player game as well, but by default it works for multiplayer game. Next thing you might want to configure is you go to the build foundation blueprint, which is within base building. You go into build blueprints and then you go to any of these are the buildables that you can build. Like all of these are the buildables that you can build. This is the data table for all the buildables that your character will be able to build. So foundation, floor, wall doors, wall windows, door with hatch, doors, windows, and then stairs. You can also build a full customized build, which is like a 2x2 build. I'll show you once I start showing you the examples for how you can implement all these buildables. Other than that, the second data table that you can see is that of resources data. These are the 4 raw materials that you will require for all your buildables as of now. Logs, nail boxes, nails, planks, and these are the max stack amounts that you can specify. These will be the maximum amounts that your players will be able to carry in their inventory for each of these types. And for each of the buildables that I showed you, all the items that are required or the raw materials that are required are specified in this items required field, which is this one. So you can just click on plus and add all the items that are required. Each item's entry needs 3 things to be specified: the data table, which is the one which we saw just now, like this one, which is the resources data table. So the first one needs to be that, and then the second one is the type of raw material that you require, and then the third one is the amount of those types of material that is required for that particular buildable. Like this, you can specify all the raw materials. So this one was for the log, so you require 4 logs for building the foundation. So yeah, this is also customizable. Whatever amounts you require for each of these raw materials, you can configure that. Next thing I wanted to talk about is how you can extend the time to open and the lifetime duration. Let's go over the time to open first. So once you open any of these buildables, right, you'll see there's a parameter for them called time to open. This field is only applicable for buildables like doors and windows. So if you go to the door, this is the one. So this is the one that you can use. One means it will take 1 second for the door to open. So this is the door. So it will open, it will swing across 90 degrees. Similarly for the windows, this is the window that you can see that you'll spawn in the structures, and again you can configure the time to open it. So right now it's configured to open within 1 second. So it will just slide over in one direction. So lifetime duration is one more parameter which can be configured for all the buildables separately. So suppose you want the build foundation buildable, once it is spawned and like finished, you want it to last on the server for say 7 days, right? So 7 days evaluates to these many number of seconds. So by default I have configured all the buildables to live for like 7 days on the server if it is a multiplayer game for you, and if it is a single player game, again it will live for like 7 days. Similarly for any of the raw materials as well, you can configure the same parameter. For example, like this is the log. Again, again, lifetime duration, if you look up, this is configured for like 8 hours. All the raw materials are configured to last in the world, whether it is a multiplayer or a single player game you're working on. Next thing I wanted to talk about is there's a blueprint that I've made for testing purposes. So if you go to blueprints, miscellaneous, this is the vending machine. When you test and try to build different buildables just to get a hang of how the build system works for this base building plugin, you might need a lot of raw materials, right, for finishing your build. What you can configure in this is, so basically you go close to this vending machine in game and you press on a key, and then it will show you a UI where it will ask you which raw material you want to spawn. So you can spawn one of these 4 raw materials that is showing. It will give you a choice for those and how much of each of those you want to spawn. You can configure whether you want to spawn those items in the world with physics or not. The parameter is called spawn with physics. So yeah, spawn with physics. If you check this, whatever item is spawned in front of it, it will have physics fully enabled. Other than that, you can also customize another parameter, which is once you come in a range of this vending machine, basically it will prompt you that you can actually use it. You can change the text for that as well, which will pop up right above this vending machine once you're close to the machine. You go to the machine, you look towards it, and then you press that button for the input or spawning whatever raw material you require. Next is build progress. If we go to the UI folder for the plugin, so there is build progress UI over here, as you see. So this is like a circle that appears in the context of a progress bar. Say you have placed a build as a hologram, right, initially to complete the build. If you want to destroy it, you hold a certain input, then the progress bar starts loading and it doesn't immediately destroy your build. It gives you a buffer time to finish destroying the build. So you can change the amount of time, as you see on the details panel on the right side, the progress duration. So it takes around 1 second to like complete the whole progress when you're destroying builds or moving it. Then there is the build radial menu. This is like a radial menu if you have seen in game like Apex Legends. You'll see there's a radial menu for different healing items. The things you can customize with this is like the radius of the radial menu, the icon size, and the offset from center. So this will be the radial menu for all the buildables that you can build, which is this table right here. There is another blueprint that I want to discuss, the Forbid Zone blueprint. What you can do with this is you can just go anywhere and you can place it there, and then what you need to do is you change the box extent for this. You can just increase this and you can just specify a section and say that okay, you are prohibited from building in these areas. Let's move on to the APIs that are there. So the first API that I want to discuss is called launch build mode. This is the API that I'm talking about. So I've configured it to be launched on press of B. So if I go into the world and I want to start building anything, so that is the API we want to call first. I pressed B. So this is the first buildable it is showing from the list of all those buildables that I showed in the data table earlier. If we go back to the data table, these are all the buildables. So right now it's telling me that I can place it because it's turning green. So if I go over here, you can see it is showing up as red. So I cannot place the buildable there. The other thing with these buildables is you can also snap the buildables. If we go to the wall, for going to the wall, we need to increment the build ID. So we do that using the increment build ID API, which is this one. Increment build ID and then decrement build ID. I go back to the world, and as you can see, it's like persisting all my changes. I started the game again and the build is there. If I scroll wheel up, it will change all my structures. So this is a floor and this is a wall. So as you can see, I can snap the walls onto the different target, and I press launch build mode key again to turn off the build mode. The next API I wanted to talk about is spawn build. Spawn build is the API which is being used over here. So for placing all these holograms for all these buildables, then the next API I wanted to talk about is rotate ghost, which is this one right here. So rotate build host, you can call the API to rotate the hologram that we are seeing there towards the right or towards the left. So I'll press the left bracket key continuously, and you can see it is like rotating my build along the Z axis towards the left side. And if I press the right bracket key, it is rotating it towards the right side. The other API I wanted to talk about is destroy build. The destroy build API is configured over here. Say I wanted to destroy this wall right here. So I'll press and hold H, and this is the progress UI that I was talking about earlier, which shows up when you want to destroy a buildable which is finished or unfinished, both. So as you can see, the unfinished buildable that got despawned. So if we come back to the game, you'll see that those changes will also be persisted. And then next API is move build. You can see the next API over here. If you want to move this build, it must be finished. So for example, if I finish this build, which brings us to another API first, which is show add build materials. Once you want to place materials for a buildable to be finished, you need to call this API, which is called show add build materials. So I look towards the buildable and I press the M key. So here it brings up the UI where it lets me many place items. So on the left side is the player inventory, and you can see I have got so many blanks, so many nails, so many boxes of nails, so many logs in my player inventory, and these are the items I require. So I have placed 0 out of 4 logs, 0 out of 1 blank, and then 0 out of 1 nail. I just drag and drop using my mouse onto the required slots, and then you see I fill those up, and then I press the key for finishing the build, which is another API. The API is called interact with build. You need to call this API on the server, and then what will happen is it will finish the build up. As you can see, if I press the E key, it finished the build up. And then if I want to move the build, so I press and hold the J key by looking at the finished buildable, and it gives me the hologram for the build, and I can actually move this build now. So if I place it there now, so it moved the build over there, and you can see if I spawn again, the build would have been moved. It's not in the original location, which was over here. The next API that I wanted to talk about is raising of the build ghost or the hologram. This is only applicable for the foundations, and all the other buildables they cannot be raised or lowered, because it's only pretty much required in the foundations case. If you place a foundation and then you want to raise or lower the build ghost, you can P raises the build ghost for me, and the O key lowers the build ghost for me. If I'm pressing the P key right now, you can see it's raising the build ghost. If I'm pressing the O key, it's lowering the build ghost. So yeah, it works only on the build foundation. Next API that I wanted to talk about is picking up of raw materials. It is this API, pick up raw materials. Whenever you're like close to the raw material, you will be able to pick up raw materials using that API. We are here, so you just go towards the vending machine, say you want logs, right? So you just tell it how many logs you want, and then you can type in whatever amount of logs you want, and then you click spawn. So it spawns the number of logs for you. And if I press O, it'll like take those 10 logs into my inventory. If I repeatedly press O, you'll see that it takes the rest of the logs from that stack and leaves the remaining stack of log, the original item that is there on the ground. Go there, grab those. You can see I got the 10 planks and the 10 nails. You can just call the API repeatedly when you spam the pickup button, and it will pick up all the overlapping raw materials. There's two APIs that are common to both the buildables and the raw materials. They are called set lifetime duration and then refresh server spawn time. These are the two APIs that I'm talking about. What you need to do is you just need to call this on the instance of the actor. For example, you do a line trace onto those actors on the server if you're using the plugin for the multiplayer game, or you just need to have a reference to the actors, not just necessarily with a line trace. And then you need to call set lifetime duration on them. If you're doing it through C++, you need to call this particular API, which is set lifetime duration pure. In that, you need to provide the number of seconds you want the lifetime of the buildable to be. For example, I want the wall buildable to have a lifetime of say 7 days, right? So I'll passing the corresponding number of seconds over here. And what will happen is, since the wall has probably already spawned, right, in some amount of time, and it will just subtract that amount of time from this duration, and the wall will remain for another remaining amount of duration. Say it was supposed to live only for 2 days, and say 1 day has passed, and you call this API while the game was running, right, on a particular buildable. So what will happen is, instead of just living for 1 more day, it will live for 6 more days, because you specified its lifetime duration to be 7 days. You can do the same for the raw materials as well. The API is same for them. If you're calling it from the blueprint, counterparts for these would be these APIs. They won't have pure at the end. The second API is refreshing of server spawn time. So whenever you spawn a buildable, there's a spawn time that gets registered as soon as it is spawned in the world. If you want to refresh the server spawn time, because it evaluates when the build needs to be despawned or when the raw material needs to be despawned based on the timestamp when it was spawned. If you call this API, what it will do is it will reset the server spawn time to when you call this API. So that will in effect extend its lifetime. Say you have a flagpole implementation, right, in your base building game. When you plant a flagpole, what you want to do is every buildable that was in the radius of that flagpole that was supposed to live for 2 days. What you want to do is, whenever you plant the flagpole, you want to extend its lifetime to 7 days. So what you will do is you will call refresh server spawn time. Next, you need to call set lifetime duration on those actors to number of seconds, which equals for 7 days. The next section I want to go over is the examples. I think I've already covered these, like placing of holograms, moving of holograms, finishing structure with buildables, moving finished structure. So I can cover this one right now. Destroying of build parent-child relationship. I go ahead and create a foundation, and then I add a wall to it, like so. Then Now these two buildables have a parent-child relationship. So if you remove the parent build, which will be the foundation in this case, because this needs a base to actually be up in the air like this. So if I look towards the foundation and destroy it, both of them gets destroyed and they drop their corresponding materials on the ground. The next thing that I wanted to show you is how you can go about building doors and windows. So if you have a wall which supports addition of a door, we can go ahead and complete that. So next we can add the door, this one. So if we look towards the door area, it will snap to it. We can go ahead and add the materials required for the door and complete it. So yeah, and then we can build a wall which supports a window. So yeah, just add that and then add a window to it. Then we finish the wall. Then we finish the window. Yeah, we look at it and press the interact key and we look towards the open window, similarly for the doors. The next thing I wanted to show you is the dropping functionality for all the materials that are added into the character inventory or the buildables. So you can drop them using the UI. By dropping, I mean you can split them if you have a stack of them in your inventory and even drop them using the same UI. If you see in my character inventory, I right click on that and then I get a menu for like dropping them. So yeah, I can adjust the slider as to how many I want to drop. Yeah, you can also just drop the entire thing. For that, what you need to do is just drag the raw material outside the layer or the buildable inventory area and they'll drop the entire stack. If you want to drop them from the buildables and I want to drop them from there, you can drop them from there as well. So 4 planks should be dropped. So yeah, you can see plank got one.